For 3 decades, Judge Eleanor Harper commanded her courtroom with an iron will, silencing lawyers, twisting justice, and locking up the innocent. But now, one man is ready to challenge it all. For attorney Marcus Bennett, this case isn't routine, it's revenge. He spent years collecting proof, waiting for the right chance to bring her down. But exposing a judge this influential might destroy him completely. If he fails, could justice still survive? If you agree that no one should escape the law, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let's make sure this story gets noticed. Share it with someone who believes true justice still matters. Now, come with us into the courtroom and watch a showdown that could change the system. Alabama's sun scorched the streets, but Courtroom 3 felt even hotter, not from the heat, but from something worse, a silent, heavy tension filling every inch. It clung to the room like smoke, invisible but stifling. Conversations died down, paper sounds vanished, bodies went still, but not in peace and dread, because in this courtroom, the verdict was never uncertain. And at its core sat Judge Eleanor Harper. She didn't just sit above the courtroom, she loomed above the law itself. Her glasses, low on her nose, gave her a piercing gaze that cut through lies. Her silver hair was tied tightly, not a strand astray, just like her grip on control. For 30 years, Harper ruled here, dealing judgment like a tyrant. She wasn't a part of the system, she was the system. She almost never raised her voice. She didn't need to. A sigh, a glance, a soft knock of her gavel, those were enough to crush resistance. Everyone knew who held the reins here, because in her courtroom, the code was cruel. A black defendant had already lost. A black lawyer's words were useless, and anyone bold enough to push back didn't last long. This wasn't civil prejudice. It was something deeper, more rooted. Some had dared to resist. One young public defender had challenged her ruling. He lost his license months later. A fellow judge once questioned her judgment. He quietly stepped down half a year after. No one ever beat Eleanor Harper. No one even tried anymore. But today, that was about to change. A pair of footsteps broke the silence, echoing across the cold marble floor. Firm, controlled, unafraid. This person didn't shrink beneath the courthouse's crushing weight. Marcus Bennett wasn't like the countless others who had entered this courtroom before. He didn't lower his eyes, didn't tug at his collar or shift uneasily in his chair. He hadn't come to play the same crooked game Judge Harper had mastered over decades. Because today, Marcus wasn't just here to protect his client, he was here to end Eleanor Harper's reign. The sharp tap of his polished shoes echoed clearly through the hushed stillness of Courtroom 3. A calm, deliberate rhythm. Marcus Bennett carried a kind of presence that didn't need to be shouted. In a room where people usually bowed or broke, he did neither. His dark suit was pressed, his posture square, his eyes unwavering. This wasn't a routine hearing. He'd been in rooms like this before, places where justice was a stage act, and sentences were signed before trials began. But today wasn't that. Today wasn't just about defending a client. It was about tearing down an empire of injustice, one allowed to fester too long. As he moved forward, heads turned, some curious, some cautious, some dismissing him already. He could feel it in the air, the quiet understanding that black men didn't win in this courtroom. And Judge Harper made sure of that. Her gaze found him sharp, appraising, not shocked, not shaken. No, she knew who he was. She'd heard the name before, a troublemaker, a thorn in the system's side. The kind of attorney who challenged not just prosecutors, but the entire structure. Harper's expression didn't shift, but something subtle passed between them. A battle line formed, silent but clear. For 30 years, She'd gone unchecked. That ended now. Marcus tugged once at his cuff, every motion controlled. He wasn't just stepping into a courtroom, he was entering hostile territory. And he knew he'd come out changed. At the defense table, hands clasped tight, shoulders caved inward, sat Jamal Rivers, a man who already looked judged, not from guilt, but from a system never built to acknowledge his innocence. Gone was the orange jumpsuit, traded for a hand-me-down suit that sagged at the shoulders, with sleeves just slightly frayed. It didn't matter. Not in this courtroom. Not to the woman in that robe. To her, he was still nothing more than another black man in metaphorical chains. The evidence against him was flimsy at best. A blurry security video showing a hooded figure. No face, no marks, no real proof. Just one witness, an elderly white store clerk who had stumbled through his statement, unsure and inconsistent, as if searching for a reason to continue. The state presented a weapon, recovered miles from a scene, untouched by fingerprints, with no direct link to Jamal. But inside Judge Harper's courtroom, facts had never held as much weight as appearances. And the appearance here was obvious. A black man, a robbery, a case that should have been thrown out long before trial. Yet here he was, his eyes turned to Marcus, looking, pleading for something. Hope, maybe. A lifeline in a place where men like him weren't given second chances. Marcus returned the look, calm and steady. A silent vow passed between them. Not today. Not this time. Because Marcus hadn't come just to present a defense. He had come to make sure, for once, the truth actually mattered. The trial had barely started, and already the game was crooked. Marcus stood tall at the defense table, voice sharp, words exact. Your Honor, the prosecution just submitted evidence not disclosed in discovery. That violates Brady versus Maryland. Harper didn't blink. Denied. Just like that. No discussion. No thought. No disguise of fairness. Marcus stayed firm. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a serious violation of constitutional law. Harper let out a loud sigh, her irritation showing. Mr. Bennett, if you want to make speeches, do it somewhere else. This court doesn't indulge in theatrics. Marcus gritted his teeth. Theatrics. That's what she called due process. That's what she called the law when it wasn't serving her purpose. Across the room, Travis Holden, the young prosecutor, fresh-faced and fresh out of law school, sat tense and tight, still learning how to read a room. But here, he didn't have to be skilled. All he had to do was mirror Harper's tone. She guided him like a conductor, correcting errors, cleaning up slips, flipping his mistakes into strategy. Mr. Holden, she said, her voice now soft, almost nurturing. Let's move along. We don't want to waste the jury's time. Marcus watched Holden's shoulders square, confidence rising in his chest. He flipped through his notes with purpose. Of course he was confident. The judge was in his corner. She always was. In the jury box, a few people shifted, uneasy. They weren't oblivious. Even the ones who'd come in assuming Jamal was guilty could see the imbalance. And in the gallery, reporters scribbled a little faster. Their pens scratched the pages harder now. They could feel it, the undercurrent, the tension, the quiet horror that this wasn't just racial bias. It was something deeper, more sinister. But no one said a word, because here silence wasn't only expected, it was necessary for survival. Marcus knew that. He'd known it before stepping through the doors. But today, silence was not an option. The air had changed. The courtroom felt off-kilter. The shift was faint, but it was real. Marcus Bennett had learned how to read a room long ago. He'd spent years in spaces like this where the shelves weren't just filled with law books, but with quiet rules, silent warnings, and expectations decided before opening arguments were ever made. But he hadn't come today to meet expectations. He came to shatter them. He turned toward the witness stand, his steps slow and deliberate, each motion intentional. Every moment had purpose. There was no need to rush. Truth was finally beginning to work on his side. Sitting ahead of him was Harold Whitmore, the prosecution's prized witness. Late 60s, lean, with jittery hands that never quite stilled. Marcus didn't speak immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch, watching as it draped itself around Whitmore's shoulders. The jury was leaning in. Reporters scribbled faster. Judge Harper? Still stone-faced. But Marcus saw it, that subtle twitch of her fingers tightening against the bench. Finally, he broke the stillness. Mr. Whitmore, he began, voice smooth, steady, you testified under oath that you saw my client, Jamal Rivers, at the scene of the robbery. Is that correct? Whitmore cleared his throat. Yes, sir. Marcus tilted his head slightly. You're sure? Just the briefest flicker of doubt. I mean, I saw someone who looked like him. Whitmore said. There it was. Marcus let it linger in the room, turned toward the jury, allowing the moment to deepen. You think you saw him, he said gently. That's not the same as knowing you saw him, is it? Whitmore's hands fidgeted. I mean it was dark. Marcus cut in, flipping open a folder. But in your original statement, he said, you told the police, and I quote, I didn't get a good look. It was dark. I only saw him for a second. Silence again. A few jurors shifted, trading subtle glances. In that first statement, you weren't sure at all, were you, Mr. Whitmore? The old man squirmed. I just remembered more later. Marcus leaned closer, gaze locked in. Did you remember? Or did someone help you remember? Whitmore swallowed, visibly shaken. The air grew tense, like stretched wire ready to snap. Marcus knew this was it, the first fracture in Harper's carefully built case. But he wasn't done. Slowly, purposefully, he stepped back to the defense table, opening his briefcase with quiet precision. He let the anticipation build. No need to force it. Let the truth create its own pressure. Your Honor, Marcus said now, voice sharper, firmer, the defense has obtained evidence that challenges the core of this prosecution. Harper stiffened barely, but enough. Marcus pulled out a set of surveillance stills and placed them onto the display. The screen lit up for the jury to see. This footage, captured from a different angle than the prosecution's, he said, pausing for effect, shows that the suspect in question, he turned, sweeping the room with his gaze, is at least 2 inches shorter than my client. A wave of whispers rippled across the courtroom. Marcus didn't flinch. He calmly reached for another document, this time a financial record. And here, he continued, voice even, is proof that Mr. Harold Whitmore received a direct deposit of $5,000 just days after identifying my client. A gasp came from the gallery. One of the jurors exhaled audibly. Even Travis Holden, the young prosecutor, looked shaken, frantically flipping through his notes, as if the truth might be buried somewhere between the lines. Marcus turned back to the witness stand. His voice didn't waver. His words hit with precision. Mr. Whitmore, he said, pausing just long enough to let the silence settle over the room, do you still stand by your testimony? Whitmore's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He had nothing. Because now the truth had finally spoken, louder than any denial he could muster. For the first time in 3 decades, Judge Eleanor Harper was no longer in full control of her courtroom, and she knew it. She felt it in the way jurors shifted uneasily, the way reporters' pens scratched faster across their notepads, and the way her own prosecutor sat frozen, clutching his notes like a man about to drown. The truth had descended over the courtroom like a weight, and Harper despised it. Her fingers dug into the bench. Her lips flattened into a razor-thin line. And then she snapped. Enough, she barked. Her voice cut through the room, sharp and stern, but it didn't land with the power it once held. She turned her glare toward Marcus, and for the first time, her polished mask slipped. You think you're clever, Mr. Bennett, she spat, decorum forgotten. Strutting around this courtroom like you're some righteous savior. But you're nothing but a showman with a taste for drama. Marcus didn't blink. He didn't retreat. He simply adjusted his tie, slow, calm, and took a single step forward. Controlled, unshaken. And you, Your Honor, he replied smoothly, are coming dangerously close to proving everything I've been saying about you. A stir swept through the courtroom. In the gallery, whispers rippled. Harper's expression turned cold and stormy. She wasn't used to being questioned. She wasn't used to losing. You're testing my patience, Mr. Bennett, she hissed, her voice now low and laced with venom. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his tone curious, not confrontational. For what exactly? He asked. For insisting this court follow the law. A few jurors exchanged glances. Someone in the gallery let out a quick laugh, quickly stifled. Harper's hand clenched around her gavel. She was losing control, and she could feel it. The way absolute authority, once hers without question, now slipped away like sand through her fingers. Marcus knew it too. He wasn't just defending his client anymore. He was leading her into the collapse of everything she had built. And Harper, cornered and furious, lashed back. "You are out of line." "Mr. Bennett," Judge Harper snapped, slamming her gavel down once, twice, a third time. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he took a step closer, calm, steady. "No, Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and sharp, slicing through the tension like a knife. "For the first time in this courtroom, you are." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was seismic. It thundered in its stillness. Judge Harper froze, her posture rigid, her face a mask, barely containing the fury beneath. She had lost her grip and she knew it. But what she and the rest of the room didn't yet realize was that Marcus Bennett wasn't done. Not even close. With slow, deliberate motion, he turned back to his briefcase. The room felt stretched thin, every eye locked on him. The moment buzzed with electricity, like a storm about to break. Harper's eyes narrowed, sensing something more. "Your Honor," Marcus began again, voice smooth and dangerously composed, "since we're addressing facts, I'd like to submit one final piece of evidence into the record." The jury leaned forward. Reporters raised their pens, poised like weapons. Even Travis Holden sat stiff and pale, dread tightening in his face as he glanced toward the bench. He knew. They all knew. Something was coming. Marcus laid a sealed manila envelope gently on the defense table. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he rested his fingertips against it, letting the moment stretch, letting the weight of anticipation settle over everyone. "This," he said, locking eyes with Harper, "is something I believe the court will find illuminating." A muscle jerked in Harper's jaw. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Bennett," she said, voice low and tight. Though her control wavered, Marcus raised a brow, his hand tapping once on the envelope. "No, Your Honor," he replied evenly. "I'm playing to win." Then, with the practiced calm of someone who already knew what the next move would cost, Marcus broke the seal. Harper sat like a statue on the bench, spine rigid, knuckles white around her gavel. Yes, she had lost some ground, but not the battle. Not yet. Not while she still had the bench beneath her and the title above her name. As long as she sat there, she believed she could still control the narrative, bury the evidence, dismiss Marcus, and remind everyone who ruled here. She opened her mouth, ready to strike the envelope down before it could be opened. Then the courtroom doors burst open. A loud thud echoed as they slammed into the walls, silencing everything. The reaction was instant. Gasps, chairs scraping, breath sucked into stunned lungs. Heads turned. Framed in the doorway stood two men in dark suits, cold eyes, federal badges gleaming. The room didn't just shift, it collapsed. The weight of Harper's authority disintegrated. She felt it, like a tremor under her feet. Her fingers clamped around the gavel. "This is a courtroom," she hissed, but her voice no longer carried command, only desperation. She snapped, her voice harsher than she meant it to be. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but..." One of the agents stepped forward, calm and composed, pulling a folded sheet of paper from his jacket. His voice was steady, too steady. "Judge Eleanor Harper," he said, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. "We need to speak with you. Immediately." And just like that, the courtroom stopped breathing. For 30 years, Judge Eleanor Harper had ruled this space with unchecked authority. Even now, standing before two federal agents, she couldn't allow herself to believe it was all unraveling. Her hand tightened around the gavel, knuckles bone white, as if clenching it could somehow keep her control from slipping away. "You're interrupting a trial," she snapped, the edge in her voice sharper now, more desperate. "This is a courtroom, not a circus. Whatever this is, it can wait." But the lead agent didn't flinch, didn't waver, didn't care. "No, Judge Harper," he replied, tone still even, still immovable. "It can't." The air in the room stretched taut. Every eye fixed on the front. This wasn't just about one boy. This wasn't about Jamal Rivers anymore. This was bigger, far bigger. The agent unfolded the document with deliberate care, and when he spoke again, his words hit like hammers. "Eleanor Harper, you are under federal investigation for bribery, obstruction of justice, and repeated violations of civil rights law." A wave of gasps rolled through the courtroom. Harper's lips parted, but no sound followed. The agent pressed on, voice cutting through the shock like a scalpel. For over 2 decades, you've presided over cases where defendants, primarily black men, were denied due process. You've accepted financial compensation in exchange for predetermined rulings. You've altered sentencing recommendations to benefit private correctional interests. This time, the silence wasn't just stunned. It was haunted, because deep down they'd all known. The attorneys who'd lost before opening arguments, the defendants who'd seen their futures vanish with the stroke of a pen, the jurors who'd felt the weight, not of justice but of expectation, settling over them like a shroud. They had known. They just never thought they'd see the reckoning. Harper sucked in a breath, her face stiff, her mask of control crumbling at the edges. "This is absurd," she spat, but her voice didn't carry the power it once had. "A baseless, politically motivated attack on my reputation." "Your reputation?" The voice was calm, smooth, measured. "Marcus Bennett." She turned sharply toward him, the mask faltering, and for the first time in all her years behind the bench, there was fear in her eyes. Marcus stood tall, no longer just a defense attorney, but something more. A symbol, a reckoning. He had watched the system fail too many times, had swallowed injustice too many times, and now, standing in this room with truth on his side and fear flickering in the judge's eyes, he wasn't here just for Jamal Rivers. He was here for every client who never had a voice, every man condemned before his case had even begun. He took a single step forward, slow and deliberate. "Tell me, Judge Harper," he said, voice calm but edged with steel, "how many innocent men have sat in that chair," he gestured toward Jamal, "and never had the chance to defend their name?" Silence. Harper's breath quickened, her pulse thundering beneath her skin. Because this wasn't just an accusation. This wasn't just a trial. This was a collapse. A reckoning of every gavel slam that wasn't justice. Every ruling handed down like a sentence from a throne. Every life she had dismantled for power, not principle. And now, for the first time, she wasn't the one rendering judgment. She was the one being judged. For 30 years, Eleanor Harper had ruled her courtroom with iron authority. But now, gripping the bench like it might anchor her in place, she felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Fear. It started as a crack hairline, almost invisible. But now it was spreading, whitening, threatening everything she'd built. Her breathing sharpened, voice rising, more shrill than firm. "This is an outrage," she snapped, panic fraying the edges of her words. She shoved herself to her feet, the gavel slipping from her fingers, clattering loudly against the bench. A politically motivated stunt. She barked. "A disgraceful, orchestrated attack meant to ruin my name. I have served this court with integrity for 3 decades. She pointed toward the federal agents, her hand shaking. "You have no authority over me." But the agents didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't even blink. Her voice, once enough to cow seasoned attorneys, to steer verdicts before a word of evidence was heard, now fell flat in a room that had already turned against her. From the gallery, murmurs grew louder. In the jury box, heads turned. Jurors exchanged glances, leaning forward as if seeing her for the first time, not as a judge, but as the woman behind the robe. Her chest tightened. She needed control. Now, her eyes darted to the desk. There, her phone, her lifeline. She snatched it up, fingers trembling as she opened her contacts, scrolling to a number she knew by heart, the one name that had always meant protection. She pressed call. Once, twice, a third time. No answer. Her breath caught. She tried again. Ring, ring, voicemail. Her stomach twisted. Her fingers hovered over the screen. And then it hit her. Sharp and sudden. A truth colder than the agent's stares. No one was coming. Not this time. She had always relied on power, relied on it to shield her, to elevate her, to make her untouchable. But now it was gone, slipping through her fingers like smoke. The phone dropped from her hand, clattering uselessly onto the desk. Still, she wasn't done, not yet. She turned sharply, desperation flashing in her eyes as they landed on the courtroom officers. The very men who had stood beside her for years, who had carried out her orders without hesitation, who had watched silently as she bent justice to her will. Her voice cracked through the silence, sharp and brittle. "Stop them." No one moved. For the first time, they didn't move. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face. She clenched her jaw. "That's an order," she snapped. Still nothing. She scanned their faces, expecting obedience, expecting fear, but all she saw was indifference. The same men who once enforced her every word now refused to even meet her gaze. And in that moment, something in her broke. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic breaths. Her hands trembled, the edges of her vision blurred. She opened her mouth, one final desperate bid for control, but there was nothing left to say. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor Harper wasn't the one giving the verdict. The courtroom stood frozen, still, silent. A space once ruled by her presence now watched as she unraveled. The judge who had commanded this bench for more than 3 decades was reduced to a shadow, shaking beneath the weight of justice. Her breath came in jagged pulls. She had fought, she had denied, she had ordered. But none of it mattered now. The lead federal agent stepped forward, each step measured, final. He unfolded a sheet of paper. The crisp sound sliced through the air like a blade. His voice was steady, calm, but resolute. Eleanor Harper, you are under arrest for multiple counts of bribery, obstruction of justice, and willful violations of civil rights under federal law. The words hit like a hammer. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. In the jury box, a few people shifted, discomfort flickering across their faces, not from disbelief but recognition. This moment had been long overdue. The agent continued, his voice cold and precise. For over 2 decades, you knowingly abused your position to deny defendants a fair trial. You manipulated evidence. You accepted financial compensation in exchange for predetermined rulings. You sentenced innocent men, many of them black men, without due process. Harper's lips parted, as if searching for some last defense, but nothing came. There were no words left, no authority left to cling to, just silence. And then the agent gave a small nod. The cuffs came next, a clean metallic snap. The sound echoed across the courtroom. Sharp, decisive, final, like the toll of a bell, marking the end of an era. For a fleeting moment, Harper tensed, shoulders stiff, spine rigid, as if her instincts might compel her to fight back. But she didn't. Her defiance collapsed inward, her shoulders sagging beneath the invisible weight of a reckoning long overdue. Slowly, deliberately, her head bowed. The woman who had spent decades perched above others in judgment now found herself descending, guided, not by choice, but by the firm hands of federal agents. As she stepped down from the bench, the echo of her heels across the floor was no longer a sound of authority, but a finality. She passed the jury box, though she once subtly commanded with a glance, then the gallery where too many had watched loved ones sentenced without mercy. No one stood. No one spoke. Because for the first time in her long and fearsome reign, Judge Eleanor Harper walked alone. And as the heavy doors swung open behind her with a slow groan, the only sound that followed her into the hallway was silence, thick, echoing, and absolute. Then a breath, a whisper, the softest crack in the tension, like the first tremor before an avalanche. A woman in the back, aged by grief and time, pressed trembling hands to her mouth, tears breaking free as she remembered the son she had lost to Harper's rulings. A man near the front, once shackled in the very chair Jamal now occupied, let out a slow, shaking breath as though finally exhaling years of invisible chains. And then, like a dam breached, the courtroom filled with a wave of quiet catharsis, relief, disbelief, release. For the first time in years, the walls of that courtroom felt lighter. For the first time in years, justice hadn't just been spoken, it had been felt. But Marcus Bennett wasn't finished. As the crowd swelled with emotion behind him, he didn't bask in it. He didn't turn to the gallery or acknowledge the flood of quiet vindication. Instead, he turned slowly toward the prosecution's table, toward Travis Holden. The young prosecutor sat frozen, his hands clenched tight around a stack of trembling notes, his face pale, lips pressed in a thin line. For years, he had followed Harper's lead, riding the current of her unchecked power, never questioning whether justice was truly being served, only whether the outcome was secured. But now that current had turned. The protection was gone. The rules had changed. There was no shield left, only law. Marcus stepped forward. His voice was calm, composed, but each word struck like a gavel. "Mr. Holden," he said evenly, "the judge presiding over this case has just been arrested on charges of systemic corruption and civil rights violations. The foundation of this trial has been exposed, not just as flawed, but as poisoned." Holden swallowed hard, said nothing. Marcus took another step, his tone unwavering. Given the overwhelming evidence of misconduct, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, Mr. Jamal Rivers." And then the room went silent again. Every eye in the courtroom shifted to Travis Holden. The young prosecutor sat stiffly, fingers still clenched around the edge of his notes. He blinked once, twice, then looked down as if searching for a defense that no longer existed. But there was nothing left to say, no argument left to make, no case left to salvage. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was expectant, heavy. Then all attention turned slowly to the bench. A new judge had taken the seat, summoned mid-chaos from a nearby courtroom. He was not known for political ties or courtroom theatrics, but for fairness, for balance. He sat quietly for a moment, his hands folded, expression calm yet unreadable. And then, with a single measured breath, he spoke. "The motion to dismiss is granted," he said, his voice clear, resolute, final. "All charges against Jamal Rivers are hereby dropped. Bailiff, remove his restraints." A sound like the wind breaking through a sealed room swept across the chamber. A collective exhale. A release. Jamal didn't move at first. His body seemed unsure, disbelieving. Then the soft click of the cuffs releasing, metal unlocking, falling away. The chains that had bound him for so long were gone. Slowly he raised his hands, staring at them like a man touching daylight for the first time. He flexed his fingers. They were his again. And then his shoulders shook. Not from fear, not from rage, but from something deeper, something older. Relief. Outside, the courthouse doors creaked open. And Jamal Rivers, once condemned, once caged, walked through them as a free man. He stepped onto the courthouse steps, blinking against the brightness. The sun greeted him like an old friend. For years, his view of the sky had been sliced by bars and concrete. But now the sky stretched above him wide, whole, and limitless. He looked up. The light touched his skin. A slow, stunned smile broke across his face. Behind him, Marcus Bennett stood in the doorway, silent. He had fought for this, bled for this. And as Jamal took his first steps into freedom, Marcus didn't smile. He simply watched, proud, steady. But his eyes were already elsewhere, past Jamal, past the crowd, past the fleeting moment of triumph. Because he knew this victory was just one of many still to come. There were more Harpers out there, more Jamals, and so many battles still waiting to be fought. Marcus stepped forward into the light, shoulders square, resolve burning in his chest. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you found this content meaningful, click like and subscribe so you won't miss the next powerful story. Tomorrow will bring you another that matters.